early on in 2022, it was at over 70% of Ukrainians thought Ukraine should continue fighting until it wins the war. And 2025 is down to 24%. And Ukrainians who think President Zelensky should negotiate an end to the war was 20 something percent 2022. Now it's above 70%. Not surprising, obviously, because Ukrainian people are suffering. I was in Kiev not long ago, and Ukrainians are suffering the most out of this war, more than the US, more than Russia, more than anyone else. But also the European economies going through some tough times. Does that worry you, and what does that mean for Ukraine's biggest ally, which is the EU?
Thank you so much. You dropped a phrase that the war started because of, the intention of NATO to expand. All right. So this is a totally Russian narrative. In fact, the war led to a NATO expansion. Sweden and Finland joined NATO. Right. So those countries who were neutral for a decades before the full scale invasion, and it's totally a fake information, and it goes into this ordinary playbooks. It has nothing to do with the
Can I ask you, do you mind if before we move on to my actual question, can we go a bit back and forth on this? I'll tell you my position. I'd love to get your genuine thoughts.
Right.
The way I see it, and again, I was in Odessa months before the war. I was in Kharkiv before the war as well. I love Ukraine. I've barely been to Russia. I love Ukraine, and some of my closest people in my life are Ukrainian, including my ex-girlfriend. So I see Ukraine ex-girlfriend. Sorry, yeah, it's my apology. But I do see Ukraine. Like, I feel sorry for Ukraine, and I blame not Ukraine. I blame NATO, especially American, the warmongers in the US that kept pushing NATO closer and closer to Russia. Now, I understand the argument that this isn't the reason. There's other reasons why Putin expanded, but I always tell people, if China right now has started putting military equipment and anti-air defense systems in Mexico, look at what Trump is doing in Venezuela and Panama. Imagine what he would do in Mexico or in Canada. So it's like, for any superpower, look how China's very upset by NATO expansion in the South China Sea. That's one of the biggest issues right now, and one of the main, areas that are heating up because of NATO's continuing expansion near Chinese borders. So when I look at this, I blame Putin completely. He's the one that invaded the country. So anyone that gives him credit, I think he doesn't deserve credit. He invaded Ukraine. I don't think his intentions were for a prolonged war. I think he expected things to, last only a few days, maybe weeks. But I also see the US playing a big role in getting us to where we are today, which is unfortunate for Ukraine. Now, I know you disagree, but do you think that it has some truth? Maybe not the only reason, but some truth at all?
Well, I can give you a bit different perspective. Listen,
Please.
so 2008, Putin arrives to Bucharest to the NATO summit and threatening the Chancellor of Germany and the French president in case they will make a decision to grant Ukraine the membership action plan to NATO. It never happened, right? So, and in 2020, I guess, or 21, President Biden meets President Putin in Geneva. Right. And it's not a secret that President Biden has had a very clear position saying that he does not support Ukraine's membership to NATO. And I'm sure it was discussed over this meeting. And even before the end of his term in 2024, when President Zelensky said that simply invitation to NATO could be a really serious step, a step to, support Ukraine, this step were not taken. So, what we're talking about, for 2 decades, there was a clear messaging from U.S. leadership and other allies that Ukraine is not joining the NATO. There were documents. There was, a nice word said about the open door policy and the real stuff, but the facts speak for themselves. So I'm just looking from this perspective that in fact Russia has continuously received signal about no intention of allies to move ahead with anything related to Ukraine's membership to NATO. While Ukraine aspirations were there, and indeed we continue thinking that defending and securing Ukraine and Europe through Ukraine's membership to NATO is the cheapest way, because Ukraine gets the technology, the knowledge, the capable military force, and it could be easily benefited by NATO. But speaking about that, I think it's not the priority task at this particular point. We're speaking about ending the war, and it implies a number of processes which does not require engagement with the aggressor, with the Russian Federation. It's about sanctions, it's about air defense, it's about security guarantees, and this is something which is more priority right now than thinking about NATO membership. So my background. I've been a member of the movement for 5 years, and I've been dealing with Ukraine's accession to European Union and reforms related to that. And I've been also deputy prime minister on Ukraine's membership to NATO. So you made the right
perfect position, perfect point for you to expand on, because I'd love to get your thoughts on what I said earlier about European support to Ukraine.
Yes. So that's why I'm mentioning that. So for us in Europe, it's just a family business. Elections are happening from time to time in this or that capitals, and Ukraine is definitely a top issue on the agenda, because for Eastern European countries, the war is just on a territory of bordering countries, and the Russian Shaheds and drones are reaching their territory, like Poland, like Romania, permanently, like Baltic countries, like even Nordic countries. So it's not literally possible to keep Ukraine out of the domestic context in every European capital.
And reports now potentially Germany as well facing disruptions.
Yes. We even had cases where some of the Russian elements were deeply flying into the territory of Poland, almost closer to the German border. So this is how Europe functioning. So these processes are happening, and of course, the radical political movement or populistic political movement are becoming extremely popular these years in Europe, because simply it's the most easy and catchy way of building the political capital, just doing something opposite that the other party is doing. So I've been also in charge of building the relations with Hungary when it comes to some things they are blocking at the European platform. So I think it's a process, but the good part of it is that now the discussions are real. So we're not speaking only about supporting Ukraine. We are speaking about European defense. We are speaking about ending the war. We are speaking about sanctions. We are speaking about procuring military equipment from U.S. to secure the defense of Ukraine, but also to secure Europe. So now this is a real discussion about the substance. It's not about having meetings, making photos, making declarations, or making a benefit of making a statement that you support Ukraine. Now the understanding is growing that we're working on something much more significant than just making a decision to support Ukraine. And like it or not, take it or leave it, I think that we should really be grateful to President Trump, because he brought this way of making the arrangements on the table. And I think it was a lot of shocking messaging in the very beginning, but as a lawyer, I judge by the facts, and the facts say that we have the 5% contribution of GDP to the defense budget through NATO. We have the mineral agreement where we prioritize U.S. investments. We have the procurement of U.S. military through NATO allied mechanism. We have a ongoing discussion on the drone deal, and we also thinking about frozen assets and how could they be used to build a stronger European defense pillar. This was not happening in reality for years, because the logic was to help Ukraine fighting, meaning to help Ukraine not to die. But now when we're speaking about ending the war, when this issue is on top, this is very different. And that means that all the layers underneath are structured in a different way.
Yeah, so we agree on a lot of what you said just now. I think words are a lot less important than actions, as you said. But there's another thing that's actions as well that is happening, is that with the Czech Prime Minister now being very critical of the war, the US is relying on Europe to fund the war. They're supplying the weapons, but Europe is now buying the weapons. And Europe's economy is struggling. And if you've got more leaders like we have now in Czech Republic, if we have more leaders that are critical of the war, they might no longer be okay in continuing to fund the war. So if Trump doesn't want to fund it, and more European countries may pull away from funding the war, that puts Ukraine in a tricky position, a heartbreaking position, but a tricky one as well. Has there been discussions with other countries? I know Turkey plays. I was speaking with one of their foreign policy advisors 2 days ago. I know they play a very important role, and they've been kind of shifting more and more in support of Ukraine under Trump's pressure. There's Modi in India. We saw Trump pressuring Modi with tariffs. That was a pretty big step. And we've seen a report by The Economist that Modi is now considering not buying Russian oil, or buying a lot less Russian oil under a bigger trade deal with the US. Is Ukraine looking elsewhere outside of Europe and the US for military support or financial support? And has there been any indication of other countries either pulling away from supporting Russia? Because I just think that one thing the world agrees on is that the war should end. Even I know we disagree on this. I think Putin wants to end the war, but the only question is under what circumstances. Putin wants, in my opinion, as much territory as possible. Ukraine would like to, keep as much territory as possible. But it would take pressure from more countries. It'd take involvement from more countries. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the tricky position between the US and European support. Both don't want to fund. The US doesn't want to fund it. More and more European countries don't want to fund it. And is there other countries that could step in and support Ukraine, like Turkey, which was a mediator not long ago, and like India? And
Well,
I need to maybe comment on, so you can also add China to the mix. I'd love to get your thoughts on whether China's stance could play a role in ending the war as well.
The position is tricky, but this is I think it's very important to understand that this is how Europe works, right? So to get to more or less significant decision, you always need to have 27 votes, unanimous votes behind that, and that's why it applies that 24/7 you negotiate until you get to the point. And this is how it's happening for the last 80 years, right? So it's always, it's like from Monday to Friday, it's always something is not going right and something goes wrong. These are 27 democracies, with different political groups and leaders, but you always have negotiate, and we will do it. And my president, foreign minister, and all the government are tirelessly working with the European governments to mobilize this unity to make this decision happen. And this is just how it works all the time. And of course, it doesn't mean that we're not worrying or not concerned by the messaging we hear from some particularly neighboring countries, which basically should have been, to our understanding, the major voices, mobilizing the support to Ukraine, because the less support Ukraine gets, the less military capacity Ukraine gets, the closer the war is to their border. Basically, it's as simple as it is. And the more negative messages we hear from neighboring country, the more positive messages this for the Russians, because they see the line of division, they see the potential in provocation, and they see that basically just they are green lighted to get 20 up to 20 Russian drones to the Polish territory. They would never do it if they felt that there is a wall of unity behind solid support to Ukraine.
What do you make of this? What do you make of it? Because you mentioned it a couple of times. What do you make of all these Russian drones getting into NATO territory? We've also gotten a report yesterday. EU's Defense Commissioner Andrius says that German intelligence has obtained information, not sure how legitimate it is, obtained information indicating that Moscow is discussing an attack against NATO. That came in yesterday. Obviously, he's just talking in a podcast. I think it was a Polish podcast where he said that. But more importantly, actions speak louder than words. We've seen day after day Russian drones poking NATO, seeing how NATO will respond. What do you make of that? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, this is Russians we're not in a movie or in a book. So Russians' aggression against NATO is not something that's gonna look like in a Rambo movie. There is a war, an attack, and a tanks. It's a different reality. They are testing the ground, and as Russians saying themselves, they put the red lines where they are allowed to, right? So first, these were parts of the drones which were falling on the Romanian and Polish territory. This was